You are holding your phone. The screen casts a pale, cold light across your face in the dim room. It is late, the kind of hour where the rest of the house is entirely silent, and you are just scrolling. You are letting the endless stream of information wash over you, half awake, half distracted. But then, your eyes catch a headline about the Vatican, and for a split second your thumb stops moving. You freeze, hovering over the glass, because a very specific, very vivid image flashes into your mind uninvited. A silver hammer, a velvet cushion, and the heavy echoing sound of metal striking the pale forehead of a dead man. You have heard this story before. You do not remember exactly where you heard it first. Maybe it was a late-night documentary playing in the background years ago, its narrator speaking in hushed, dramatic tones over shaky footage of St. Peter's Square. Maybe it was an article you skimmed on a forum, or a whisper from someone at a dinner party who swore they knew the dark, hidden secrets of Rome. But wherever it came from, it stayed with you. It burrowed into your memory and it bothers you. There is something deeply, viscerally unsettling about an institution that elevates a human being to the level of the divine, that calls him infallible in life. But the very first thing they do when his chest stops rising is prove, with a hammer and a doctor, that he was just a fragile, mortal body all along. Wait, you think to yourself, staring at the glowing screen. Do they actually hit the dead Pope's head with a hammer to check if he is really dead? That cannot still be real in the 21st century. Can it? The thought lingers. Uncomfortable and sticky? Why does the Catholic Church need so many secret shadowed rituals for every single transition? What actually happens to the Pope's ring after he takes his last breath? Do they really destroy it? Smash it to pieces in front of a silent audience of cardinals in the Apostolic Palace? What are they so terrified someone will do with it if it survives intact? And every time you hear that ancient Latin phrase, Sede Vacante, the empty seat, you picture some kind of sprawling, terrifying power vacuum. You imagine chaos brewing behind those massive, impenetrable wooden doors. Who is actually in charge during those long, silent weeks while the world waits for white smoke? Why does nobody ever explain the mechanics of it clearly without wrapping it in theology? Is everything they teach us about the Vatican just an embellished myth, a ghost story for adults? Or is there a real, breathing, violently pragmatic ritual hiding underneath all that legend? If these questions keep you awake, if this kind of story resonates with you in a place you cannot quite name, it is worth clicking subscribe right now. The YouTube algorithm only shows this kind of unvarnished, atmospheric, historical deep dive to people who actively signal that they want more of it. And believe me, we have a lot more of these stories to tell. Stories that strip the paint off the statues and look at the stone underneath. I know exactly how that creeping curiosity feels in your chest. I hasten because for a long time, I was the one who was supposed to stand at the front of the room and have all the answers. For 12 years, I stood in a classroom in a Catholic high school in Evansville, Indiana, teaching history to teenagers. I can still close my eyes and smell that room perfectly. It always smelled faintly of old industrial floor wax, dried paper, and the sharp bite of chalk dust. In the dead of winter, the heavy iron radiator in the corner by the window would hiss with a constant low drone, a white noise that underscored every lesson about the saints and the martyrs. When the curriculum brought us to the chapter on papal succession, the textbook always treated the whole colossal process like a seamless, bloodless transition. The papacy was described as a holy baton passed cleanly and quietly from one blessed hand to another. The glossy pages never explained what physically happened to the body in the chaotic, uncertain hours immediately after death. The book never mentioned the rings, the broken lead seals, the whispering in the corridors, or the sudden crushing emptiness of power that floods the apostolic palace the moment a pope dies. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon in late November. The sky outside the tall windows was a bruised gray, threatening the first real snow of the year. The classroom was warm and stifling. A kid in the back row, a quiet, observant boy who usually never spoke up, raised his hand. He did not ask about the dates of the Council of Trent or the theology of the Eucharist. He asked about the silver hammer. He had read about it online, falling down some rabbit hole late at night, much like you did. He wanted to know, with genuine, wide-eyed curiosity, if the highest officials of the church really gathered around a bed and smashed a dead man's skull to prove he was gone. I hesitated. I stood there, the chalk heavy in my hand, looking at 25 expectant faces, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I did not have a good answer. I had the theology, I had the dates, I had the official narrative memorized, but I did not have the physical truth of the room where the man dies. The school chaplain happened to be sitting in the back of the room that day, ostensibly observing my class to ensure doctrinal adherence. When he heard the boy's question, he visibly shifted his weight in his small wooden chair. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound cutting through the quiet room, and interrupted. He changed the subject so fast, steering us back to a safe, abstract theological point, that the air in the room suddenly felt thick and awkward. It was a visceral discomfort. You could see it on his face. The sudden panic of a man confronted with the messy physical reality of the institution he defended. The silence that followed his interruption was heavy. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that tells you a question is not just wrong, but too raw, too real, too dangerous for a sanitized classroom. That silence bothered me for years. It gnawed at me. It bothered me because the very institution that taught me to seek the truth, that claimed to be the ultimate arbiter of truth, seemed absolutely terrified of its own shadow. The chaplain's discomfort was a glaring signal. It told me that beneath the polished marble and the soaring hymns, there was a mechanical, almost brutal reality that we were not supposed to look at. When a Spanish-speaking colleague of mine later introduced me to the investigative work of the journalist J.J. Benitez, it felt like a heavy, locked door being violently kicked open in my mind. Benitez did not just accept the official uncomfortable silences of the church. He dug his hands into them. He looked directly at the historical anomalies, the strange, jagged details that simply did not fit the neat, theological narrative they fed us. That is exactly what I started doing. I spent my nights in Evansville reading, cross-referencing, looking for the cracks in the official story. I eventually ended up resigning from that school. I realized, with a heavy heart but a clear conscience, that I could no longer stand in front of those kids and teach a polished, frictionless version of history. I could not be a participant in the silence anymore. I had to know what really happened when the massive bronze doors of the papal apartments were locked from the inside, when the television cameras were turned off, and the ancient, creaking machinery of the Vatican had to deal with the terrifying, messy reality of human death. What I found in my research was a distinct, repetitive pattern, a pattern of repetition without verification. It is a trap we all fall into, even the historians. Almost every popular article, every breathless conspiracy forum, every late-night television documentary repeats the exact same story about the silver hammer as if it were absolute, unquestionable dogma. People are naturally drawn to the macabre. We are deeply fascinated by the idea of a secret, archaic ritual, something straight out of the Dark Ages, happening right now, hidden behind the high walls of Rome while the modern city bustles outside. We want the Vatican to be a place of dark magic and ancient spells because it makes the world feel more mysterious, more like a novel. But the truth, as it so often is much stranger than the myth, and in many profound ways it is much more deeply human. Let us strip away the legend, the rumors, and the internet folklore and look at the actual documented rules. The primary text that governs the death of a pope and the incredibly complex election of his successor is an apostolic constitution. It is a massive, incredibly detailed legal document called Universi Dominici Gregis. It was issued by Pope John Paul II in 1996. This document is not a suggestion. It is the absolute, official blueprint for the transition of power in the largest religious institution on the planet. It dictates everything from the color of the ink to the exact phrasing of the oaths. If you read it, if you spend hours combing through every single paragraph, every subclause of that text, looking for the macabre, you will notice a glaring omission. There is absolutely no mention anywhere in the text of a silver hammer striking the Pope's forehead. None. The modern procedure, as outlined in the highest law of the Church, requires the Camerlengo, the cardinal who essentially administers the Church during the vacancy, to ascertain the death in the presence of the master of papal liturgical celebrations and the cleric prelates. Today, in our modern era, this is done with the help of a Vatican physician and modern medical equipment. A doctor checks the vitals. The heart stops pumping, the brain activity ceases, the monitors go flat, and science declares the man dead. So where did the terrifying story come from? If it is not in the official rules, is it completely fabricated by tabloids trying to sell a cheap thrill? No. That is the fascinating, complex thing about Vatican myths. They almost never materialize out of thin air. They almost always grow from a very real, very historical seed. An independent, investigative outlet, a secular fact-checking organization called the Skeptical Inquirer, spent time tracing this specific legend back through centuries of history, digging through old ceremonial manuals and witness accounts. They found that there was indeed a traditional, highly choreographed ritual to confirm the death of the pontiff before the advent of modern medicine. But it was not the violent, skull-crushing blow that the internet collective imagination insists upon. I want you to imagine the scene as it played out centuries ago. Picture it clearly in your mind. The Pope has just exhaled his last, rattling breath. The room, draped in heavy fabrics, is entirely silent, save for the muffled weeping of the closest attendants and secretaries. The air is thick, almost unbreathable, heavy with the scent of myrrh, burning beeswax candles, and the undeniable metallic smell of mortality. The Camerlengo, dressed in his robes of state, approaches the grand bed. He holds a small, ornate silver hammer in his right hand. He leans over the lifeless body of the man who, just moments ago, was considered the vicar of Christ, the bridge between heaven and earth. The Camerlengo gently, carefully taps the Pope's pale forehead 3 times, and with each tap, his voice breaks the heavy silence. He calls out, but he does not use the man's grand chosen papal name. He does not use the title of his supreme, universal authority. He calls out his baptismal name. The name he was given as an ordinary, fragile infant, long before the world knew him, long before the terrible weight of the tiara was placed on his head. En dormine? He asks in Latin, his voice echoing slightly in the large chamber. Are you sleeping? He asks it 3 times. The silence that fills the room after the 3rd question, the absolute lack of response from the flesh that used to command millions, is the official, undeniable confirmation of death. Only then, when the silence is absolute and complete, does the Camerlengo turn to the assembled officials, his face drawn, and pronounce the heavy final words, vere mortuus est. He is truly dead. That ritual, the calling of the humble birth name, and the gentle tapping, was reportedly performed in its traditional form as recently as 1963, at the death of the beloved Pope John XXIII. But today, the silver hammer is no longer used on the flesh of the pontiff. The chilling poetry and drama of the 3 taps, the calling of the lost child's name, have been entirely replaced by the cold, indisputable flatline of an electrocardiogram monitor. The Church has modernized its verification of death. However, the silver hammer has not vanished from the Vatican's secret cabinets. Its true purpose, the actual reason it is still brought into that room of mourning, has nothing to do with waking the dead or verifying the end of biological life. It has everything to do with the living, and what the living, in all their flawed, desperate ambition, might do with an empty throne. The very moment the Pope is declared dead, a terrifying period known as Sede Vacante begins. The empty seat. For a few tense, paranoid weeks, the most centralized, hierarchical institution on Earth, an institution that relies entirely on a single man for absolute direction, has no ruler. Church law is incredibly strict about this period. According to the Code of Canon Law, specifically Canon 335 and its related norms, no binding governing decisions can be made. The laws cannot be changed, no bishop can be appointed, no new doctrines can be defined. The Camerlengo takes over the administration of the goods and temporal rights of the Church, but his power is strictly limited to keeping the lights on. He is a caretaker, a temporary guardian of the transition, not a king. He cannot alter the course of the ship. He can only keep it from sinking. But the anxiety of the empty throne is palpable. It is a physical weight in the air of Rome. You can feel it built into the very architecture of the rules, the layers upon layers of security and secrecy. The Vatican is terrified of a power vacuum. They know their own history. They know what men, even holy men, are capable of when absolute authority suddenly disappears and the greatest prize in the world is up for grabs. This brings us to the ring of the fisherman. Every single pope wears it. It is custom cast in solid gold for him at the very beginning of his papacy, unique to his reign. It bears his chosen papal name and the ancient image of Saint Peter, casting his nets from a boat into the sea. For centuries, this heavy gold ring was not just a piece of decorative jewelry to be kissed by visiting dignitaries and pilgrims. It was the Pope's personal, exclusive seal. It was the ultimate signature of God's representative on earth. When pressed into hot red wax, that ring gave absolute, unquestionable, infallible authority to any document, any decree, any transfer of wealth, any excommunication it touched. It was the physical manifestation of his power. When the Pope dies today, the Camerlengo still takes the silver hammer, but he does not strike the man. He turns away from the bed. He strikes the ring. He must physically destroy the ring of the fisherman, along with the lead seals of the papacy, in the presence of the College of Cardinals. He brings the hammer down on the gold, crushing the image, ruining the name, turning the ultimate symbol of power back into a worthless lump of metal. You might look at that act, the violent smashing of a sacred object, and think it is an occult, superstitious gesture. A magical unbinding of the man's soul from the office, a spiritual severing of his earthly ties so he can pass into the next world unburdened by the weight of the Church. That is what people want to believe because it feels mystical, arcane, and safely removed from our modern reality. But if you speak to leading historians of papal funerary rituals, scholars like Agostino Paravicini Bagliani, who have spent their lives buried in the Vatican archives, they will tell you something entirely different. If you trace this violent practice back to its origins in the Middle Ages, you find a very concrete, very urgent, and entirely secular administrative problem. The destruction of the ring was not magic. It was the ultimate anti-forgery measure. Think about the brutal reality of the Middle Ages. The Pope is dead. The throne is empty. Communication across Europe is agonizingly slow, carried on horseback over dangerous, muddy roads. The power vacuum in Rome is vast and incredibly dangerous. Rival noble families, ambitious cardinals, foreign kings, everyone is circling the Vatican looking for an advantage. If someone corrupt, someone with ambition and unfettered access to the papal apartments got their hands on an intact papal seal during those chaotic, unmonitored weeks, the damage they could do is incalculable. They could issue binding documents in the dead man's name. They could forge massive land grants, siphon off immense church wealth, issue excommunications to political enemies, or manipulate the upcoming election to favor their own candidate. They could forge the voice of God himself. And because the seal was perfect, no one in France or England or Spain would be able to prove it was a lie until it was far too late. The ritual of smashing the ring with a hammer was never a dark superstition. It was ruthless, necessary law enforcement. It was an ancient, brutal form of bureaucratic security, born of profound paranoia and dressed up in velvet and incense to make it look like a holy rite. This is what happens when you look closely at the things that scare you, the things that seem impossibly strange. What you thought was a dark, mystical ritual is actually a deeply pragmatic, almost desperate system of control. The Church is not acting out of a fear of ghosts or roaming spirits. It is acting out of a fear of human corruption. They know that a golden ring in the wrong hands during a period of instability is far more dangerous than any phantom in the dark. And we know this is true. We know the ritual is entirely functional, not magical, because of the exception that proves the rule. History handed us the perfect test case just a few years ago. In February of 2013, something entirely unprecedented in the modern era happened. Pope Benedict XVI resigned. He stepped down voluntarily. It was the first papal resignation in over 600 years since the absolute chaos of the 15th century. It was a symbolic death of the papacy, the end of a reign, without the physical death of the frail man who held the office. The entire world, and especially the traditionalists within the Church, watched with bated breath to see what the Vatican would do with his ring. The man was still alive. He was breathing, walking the quiet gardens of Castel Gandolfo, his heart still beating steadily. Would they smash his ring to pieces while he still drew breath? If the ritual was a magical severing of the soul from the office, they would have to destroy it completely, obliterate it from existence. According to a specific legal document, an updated protocol issued by Benedict himself to handle this exact, unprecedented scenario, they did not smash his ring to pieces. They did not obliterate the gold. Instead, they defaced it. Using specialized tools, they carved 2 deep cuts into the face of the golden seal, forming the shape of a cross over his name and the image of Peter. They rendered it completely useless for sealing any official documents, but they deliberately preserved the physical object intact, placing it in the Vatican Museum as an artifact. It was the first time in modern history that the destruction step was modified rather than performed in full. Why did they change the ancient, supposedly sacred rule? Because the man was not dead, and because the goal was never to magically sever his soul from the gold. The goal was always, simply, coldly, and pragmatically, to void the signature, to stop anyone in the Curia from using his name to pass laws while he was quietly retired. The exception proved that the rule was designed around a functional purpose, not a rigid magical formula. The Vatican adapted the ritual because the administrative threat had changed, proving that the massive bureaucracy always trumps the mysticism. Go back for a second to that quiet room where you are sitting right now, to the pale light of your phone screen illuminating your face, to that haunting image that flashed in your mind of the silver hammer striking the forehead. Now you know that it is not the skull that needs to be broken. It is the seal. It is the terrifying capacity for the living to forge the authority of the dead. The anxiety you felt, that visceral discomfort at the idea of the ritual, was entirely real and entirely justified. But it was misplaced. You were afraid of a medieval superstition, of a church clinging to dark magic. But the Vatican was afraid of something much more grounded, much more human, and infinitely more dangerous. They were afraid of raw ambition in the face of an empty throne. They were afraid of themselves. The silence that falls over those grand corridors during Sede Vacante is not a magical silence. It is the silence of a massive, ancient machine, holding its breath, locking down its own power, terrified of its own shadow and the men who walk within it. They were doing the best they could to protect the institution from the very people running it. The silence wasn't hiding a dark ritual. It was hiding the most human fear of all, the sheer, unadulterated terror of losing control. If this journey into the reality behind the myth shifted something for you today, if it made you see history a little differently, if it made the marble statues seem a little more human and flawed, consider leaving a super thanks. This channel exists entirely because we refuse to accept the sanitized, surface-level stories they print in the textbooks. We dig into the dusty archives. We trace the history of the documents. We separate the romantic legends from the often brutal, pragmatic truth of human nature. Your support allows me to keep doing this intense research, to keep kicking open those heavy wooden doors and showing you what is actually inside the machine. You are not just a viewer of this channel. You are a patron of real, unvarnished historical investigation, and I am deeply grateful you are here. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one historical myth or religious legend that you always suspected was entirely made up, but you never had the solid proof to confirm it? Let me know down there. We read them all, and maybe your question will be the spark for our next deep dive. Oh, and there is one more thing. If you want to go even deeper into the unwritten history, the link in the description and the pinned comment will take you to the Spinoza Forever Library, a collection of 5 volumes where we explore the texts and the ideas that did not make it into the official canon. It is there if you are ready for it.